asking me along. It's a great honour to be asked along here. And it's actually a great honour to be asked along to speak about the Ulster Defence Regiment. Because the Ulster Defence Regiment, the talk I'm going to give you is, although it's a historical talk, it's actually a very personal talk to myself as well. And I know we're here in Loughgall, which is 2 UDR country. And so I hope I'm not, I always tell you if you're doing a talk to bring along a prop. And so in my house I was actually lucky enough to have the Portadown Regimental standard, the 11th Battalion. So I hope I'm not annoying all these Armagh men by having the Portadown standard here. We've taken Loughgall tonight. Nice start. You see here, before we actually start, I've seen a lot of stuff online and people starting to make all these dopey UDR souvenirs, all for UDR 50 and all this nonsense. And they've their own badge on them all. You see more stuff and they've got this harp with 6 strings and the angel's got a real big back bend to her back and the crown's floating somewhere in the air. That's not a UDR badge. If you see a badge, it has to be gold. There'll be 12 strings on the harp. The crown will be resting down on it. And it's a very historic military badge that in Irish military history. It goes back to the Royal Ulster Rifles, back to the Royal Irish Rifles. That harp goes back for quite a period of time in Irish military history. So it's wrong to let these fly-by-night boys try to dishonour it by coming up with silly wee souvenirs with their own badge. But the UDR, 1970 to 1992. The Ulster Defence Regiment was created by an Act of Parliament. It was actually the Ulster Defence Act, which was passed in December 1969 and came into law on the 1st of January 1970. And this all came out of the Hunt Report. And the Hunt Report was looking at security in Northern Ireland, and its findings was that civil disorder and terrorism should come under the control of the military and not the civilian police force. And by that one act, that done away with the Ulster Special Constabulary. So we're saying this year's the 50th anniversary of the UDR. It's also the 50th anniversary of the standing down of the Ulster Defence, of the Ulster Special Constabulary. And it's also the 100th anniversary of the Ulster Special Constabulary. It was formed in 1920. The first member of the B Specials to be killed was killed here in County Armagh. Only within weeks of the regiment of the service being formed. 17 members of the Ulster Special Constabulary would be killed here in County Armagh, and 60 altogether in the first 2 years of Northern Ireland. They'll tell you the troubles come out of a civil rights protest in the 1960s. In the first 2 years of Northern Ireland, 1921 and 1922, Sinn Féin IRA, under the command of Michael Collins, murdered 440 people in Northern Ireland. So it didn't come out of some wee civil rights organisation thing in the 1960s. For 100 years next year, Northern Ireland will be 100 years old, and has been under constant attack for those 100 years. So don't fall for the propaganda. As I said, the Act came into place in January 1970. Right away, they started to advertise looking men to volunteer. And by March 1970, they had 4,791 applicants. 946 of those applicants were from the Catholic community. The enemies of Northern Ireland will tell you it was a completely unionist force. There was always Roman Catholics in the UDR. There was Roman Catholics killed in the B Specials here in County Armagh. But the enemies of the state went out of their way to intimidate and threaten and kill, to drive the Catholics out of the Ulster Defence Regiment and out of the Ulster Special Constabulary. It wasn't sectarianism within the group. You can point a finger after you've driven everyone out and say, look at that, there's no Catholics in that. But you have to ask why. And it was by their hands, the ones who are complaining. Some of you might remember this.
Would you mind opening your barn door, please?
I don't know nothing to do then. I stop for people in the morning, go to their work. Huh?
Oh, it's one of those again. Thinks this is what the UDR does. Well, they should see the other side.
Put your hands up. Where are they on the wall? Come on, Jimmy! Out! Hands up! Hands up!
Of course, he's tucked up in his bed every day. That's a sight that he'd never see.
Why don't you people go and get some dirt?
Thank you very much.
So where did you people go catch some terrorists? The Ulster Defence Regiment, you'll hear talk about the troubles here in Northern Ireland as Operation Banner. Well, Operation Banner had a mission statement, and that was to assist the RUC in the maintenance of law and order and in the defeat of terrorism. Whenever we used to go on patrol, before you went on patrol, you used to have a briefing. And before you left, the Sergeant Major would always come out with the mission. Today's mission is to assist the RUC in the maintenance of law and order and in the defeat of terrorism, and to that end we are going to do blah blah blah, whatever it was we're going to do. When the regiment was first formed, it had 7 battalions. One was the city of Belfast and the other 6 were county battalions. And they were numbered alphabetically, going 1st County Antrim, 2nd County Armagh, 3rd County Down, 4th County Fermanagh, 5th Londonderry, 6th Tyrone, and then the 7th was the city of Belfast. But by 1972, they realised in certain parts of the province, 1 battalion for the whole county wasn't enough, and so 4 more battalions were formed. And one of those would be the 2nd Battalion here in County Armagh, which would be the 11th Battalion in Portadown. And that's the best battalion in County Armagh, or these places would have me before I leave. In the very, very first years, the military had the idea that this was going to be a bit of a flash in the pan. It'll come over, it'll all be dealt with, but a bit like the First World War, by Christmas we'll all be heading home again. So there wasn't a lot of investment went in. They pulled out all the old kit they had left over from the Second World War in the army stores, and you see the boys in the old style military uniforms and with 303 rifles. The equipment they had was very basic. But the situation, it didn't fade out. The trouble actually intensified. So then they had to change the equipment and start becoming more professional in the way they approach things. I actually heard a rumour, you all think of the SLR when you think of the UDR, or the SA-80 would have been for the Royal Irish Regiment. But all the SLRs that they used in the UDR, does anyone know where they come from? Well, they were made in the end in England to start with. The Australians were fighting in Vietnam along with the Americans. And the Australians bought their military hardware from the British, and the Americans manufactured their own. And the British rifles took 7.62mm rounds, and the Americans took 5.56mm rounds. So it meant whenever the Australians were out in the jungle being attacked and they had to be resupplied, the American Air Force was bringing them the wrong ammunition. And so the Australians were losing lots of soldiers because they couldn't get a good supply of equipment. So the Australians switched over to start using the American ammunition and the American weapons. And so they had a surplus of rifles. So the British bought them all back again. And all the Vietnam rifles ended up back here in Northern Ireland. They had to go out, we're going to get 15,000 rifles on the market. Well, there's about selling 15,000 of the rifles we already use. You know, so that's what actually all come from. My earliest memory of the Ulster Defence Regiment, I grew up in Rose Park. I lived in number 8 Rose Park in Mullavilly. And the first man to die in the UDR, he's not actually on the UDR Roll of Honour. He has a UDR grave because they get me to lay a wreath on it every year. Because now all the older men who served with him have passed away, and they found out then I actually knew him. This man is Private Jack Proctor. He was in 2 UDR before 11 UDR was formed. And 2 UDR had only just been formed. And Jack was on patrol in the Portadown Road in Lurgan. They were doing one of the first checkpoints they did. And a car came up and drove over the top of Jack and killed him. People weren't used to checkpoints, weren't used to anything like that there. And so he lived in number 12 Rose Park, I lived in number 8. So we were all at primary school in Mullavilly Primary. Where's Nigel? Nigel Proctor was in the school, he's disappeared. And so all the wee 5-year-old boys, we were all coming down the road home from school. We got to Rose Park. And like all wee boys, we were fascinated. Rose Park was full of soldiers and a big gun carriage and coffin on it with a Union Jack and all on it. This man, the first man to die in UDR, and he's not on the Roll of Honour. The government manipulated the figures to keep people off, to make the situation not look as bad as it was. If he hadn't been on duty, he wouldn't have been killed. But they'd only just formed, he was knocked down in Lurgan. The time there was only 2 UDR for the whole of County Armagh. But in 1972, they decided they needed 4 more battalions. And the 1st of July keeps coming around in military history here in Northern Ireland. We'll think of the 1st of July with the Battle of the Somme. The Royal Irish Regiment was formed on the 1st of July. 11 UDR was formed on the 1st of July, 1972. And it was formed by taking 2 companies out of 2 UDR, C Company Lurgan and E Company Portadown, and taking D Company out of 3 UDR County Down, which was Banbridge, Guildford, and they brought them together and they formed a new battalion with its headquarters at Fort Seago in Portadown. Although the Lurgan battalion or Lurgan Company was based at the King's Park camp in Lurgan, and the Banbridge Company was based in the Scarver Road camp in Banbridge. So it was formed on the 1st of July 1972. The date that keeps coming around in Northern Ireland military history. I actually served in B Company and E Company. B Company was Tandagee and E Company was Portadown as they come around. But it went operational in 1972 and it became the first battalion in the Ulster Defence Regiment to have responsibility for one whole RUC division, J Division, in North Armagh. And most of you don't think of Fort Seago. People like me don't remember, the young ones, but the ones, this all one on the 1st of January 1974, the battalion moved to a new camp which they had built for Fort Mahon in Portadown, which is still there. And it was officially opened by Sir Norman Strong on the 20th of April 1974. in 1974. Also, Banbridge UDR would move to Portadown to Fort Mahon, and in 1976, Lurgan UDR would move. By this time they were in Kitchen Hill Barracks, but they would move across, which made 11 UDR the first battalion in the Ulster Defence Regiment to have all of its companies based in one barracks. All the ones that all are outlying barracks all around Armagh had Glenann and places like that there, but Portadown was the only battalion where all of the companies were now in one camp. And that would all change even more. By I said the army started off with this idea it would all be over in no time. By 1977, again coming right on the 1st of July, they had to create a full-time battalion, or a full-time company. They were now becoming more and more, the situation wasn't getting better, it was getting worse. So things kept on moving on. As for 11, 18, some more important things, and their date would be on the 18th of September 1982, we got the freedom of Craigavon. I can just remember it. I joined not long before that. When I joined UDR, I joined at 17. You weren't allowed to do an operational duty until you were 18 years old. So I did my training when I was 17, and I did my first operational duty one day after my 18th birthday. So they kept right up to it, which means at that particular moment I would have been the youngest serving soldier in Northern Ireland until the next batch of people come in. And then as things moved on, it says B Company then became Lisburn. Lisburn UDR was brought in to work under the command of Portadown. So B Company became Lisburn, and all of Portadown, Clondalkin all became E Company. In 1991, it started off as 2 UDR. By 1991, it was now 211 UDR. They brought the 2 battalions back as 1 battalion. And then on the 1st of July, 1992, the date that keeps coming round, they amalgamated the Royal Irish Rangers and the Ulster Defence Regiment to become the Royal Irish Regiment. This is actually a couple of the men we're looking at the other day trying to see if you could recognise anything. This is actually in Fort Mahon. There's the old gate where they used to come in, and the big building most people would know when you're driving the road is behind when the officers are saluting, and they're walking around from B Company lines. Who can remember a town like this here? Every town in the country. Portadown was actually one of the last towns to have a security barrier. Only took it down last year in Edward Street. But I'd love to I haven't any pictures of the one at the top of the town, but people forget. You show them people, what? You can only go to the town in certain hours. And there used to be these barriers were prime spots for attacks. There was a policeman, remember, being killed at the top barrier in Portadown. There was a member of the Ulster Defence Regiment who were coming around, he was shot at the barrier in Lurgan. You know, there were prime ambush points. But who can remember like the town? It seems amazing now when you see the town like this. I go to France regular, and I remember a few years ago, now that the terrorism in France, well, I was sitting in Paris at a wee cafe, and it's so strange. And the army foot patrol come up the street, and right away you felt uneasy. What's wrong? What kind of place is this? Is this a bad? And for most of my life, I lived in a place where that would have been once it had stopped for a few years and you hadn't seen it, when you went somewhere else and suddenly there was a military foot patrol coming up the street, you were, where am I? You know, took you right back. Have you seen the boys put a load of flags up in Portadown this year coming up the 12th of July? because they weren't having the parade, but they decorated the town all out in flags and in bunting. And Sinn Féin was given off, saying this is offensive, this is terrible, it'll put people off coming into Portadown. Who would want to go into a town like that? Well, that's what Sinn Féin IRA has to offer Portadown. And every odd town in this country. They blew the centre out of towns, and they would wait until that was rebuilt. It'd take 2-3 years to rebuild it, and as soon as they got rebuilt, they'd bomb it all over again. There's not a town in the country you could go round where they hadn't done that. Complaining that a flag's going to offend someone, put people off coming up to town. Would that not offend you and make you feel uneasy about going up to town? They're very easy to forget what they were actually up to. On the 26th of August 1973, up until this point, female members of the Royal Military Police were doing searching of women in Northern Ireland, if any women come around. And so it was decided that the Ulster Defence Regiment would actually form the Women's Ulster Defence Regiment, WUTR. It would be called the Greenfinches. But it actually became the first regiment in the British Army to have women fully integrated into the regiment, and women served on the front line along with the men. This was groundbreaking in military terms. No other regiment in the army, right up until the 1990s, would have women serving with men, fully integrated on patrol. But sadly, we know what Northern Ireland was like then. If women were serving on the front line along with the men, women were going to die along with the men. And these are 4 female members of the regiment. Eva Martin, she was in 4 UDR at Deany Barracks in Clocker, County Tyrone. And at 11:10 on the 2nd of May 1974, 40 IRA terrorists launched an attack on the barracks. There were 20 UDR in the barracks at the time. There was heavy small arms fire, and 27 mortars were fired and 3 rocket-propelled grenades at the barracks. One of the RPGs exploded, killing Eva Martin and wounding a lieutenant standing beside her. Richard Martin, Eva's husband, he was on duty in the barracks at the same time, along with his wife when she was killed. And how, you say, well, how would there be so many IRA? It was 9 cars hijacked and abandoned over the border when they got away. That's how they know how many was involved in the attack. And she became the first female soldier to die in the British Army since the Second World War. Jean Liggett, who would die in 2 UDR here in Armagh. She was shot by an IRA sniper near Middletown while on patrol on the 6th of April 1976. The driver of the Land Rover she was travelling, he was also wounded in the leg. She had previously served with the Women's Royal Army Corps. And her husband, he was a colour sergeant in the Irish Guards attached to 2 UDR at that time. So he had been fully aware of the risks and all his wife was taking. Margaret Hurst, she was killed the 8th of October 1977 at Tynan. The terrorists held her grandmother and young brothers hostage while they waited for her to come home. She was shot in a mobile home in the garden of the family home, and her 3-year-old child was with her in the home at the time. Her father was abducted from Middletown and murdered by the IRA on the 4th of September 1980. So in two separate instances, members of that family was murdered by the IRA. And her father was a member of the Orange Order. And Corporal Heller Kerrigan, again a member of 4 UDR, on the 14th of July 1984 at Castle Derg, a landmine exploded on an 8-man foot patrol. Private Norman McKinley was killed in the attack. Heller was wounded and would die on the way in the helicopter on the way to the hospital. Her brother was seriously injured in the same attack. He was on the patrol with her. Sinn Féin and IRA will tell you it's time to move on, it's time to forget all this nonsense if you bring up anything about what they're doing. 30 years to the day after Heller had died, they went out and put a sign up at the spot she died, IRA 2, UDR 0. So the people who's telling you it's time to move on, it's time to forget all this, they're not forgetting anything. They're doing their best to continue to intimidate and threaten people. As the regiment moved on in the late 80s, don't like talking about generals and colonels, and I'm sure a lot of these don't. They spent more time in the camp and less time on the ground. But the Queen came over, these are the 3 top dogs of the UDR with the Queen, which was over to present colours to the regiment. But on the 6th of October 2006, after the UDR had amalgamated with the Royal Irish Rangers, the Conspicuous Gallantry Cross was presented to the Royal Irish Regiment, who tried to argue to us it was presented to the Royal Irish Regiment and it had nothing to do with the UDR. But if you read the citation, it was presented to the UDR. The UDR would lose 197 serving members in the Troubles here in Northern Ireland. It would lose 61 former members in the Troubles here in Northern Ireland, and 5 former members of the UDR would lose their lives serving in the Royal Irish Regiment after it had merged with the Royal Irish Rangers. And a lot of them, there's 68 names recorded in the Garden of Remembrance here, and a lot of those people are recorded there. Her Majesty the Queen would present the Royal or the Conspicuous Gallantry Cross to the regiment, and she presented it to Claire Willers, Corporal Claire Willers. On the 8th of August 1994, Corporal Telford Willers, Claire Willers' father, he was a butcher. He was also the organist in the local Presbyterian church. Everyone said he was a lovely man, a great man. Everyone in town loved him. The IRA turned up and they murdered him. It was his daughter who collected the medal from the Queen. He was a father of 5 children. A year after he was murdered, his wife died from cancer. He had 5 orphaned children. You don't hear these people mentioned when they're going along. They're all just written out of the story of Northern Ireland now. They don't want to talk about this here. Sergeant Harry Dixon. Harry was a train driver, worked at Lurgan train station, lived in Warnview. 29th February 1972, a knock come to the door, and like most of us, side of his door was glass panels letting light into the hallway. As he walked, him and his daughter, to see what the knock was at the door, they opened fire through the glass, shooting him and wounding his daughter. The whole complaint from Republicanism was that the next day and the day of Harry's funeral. There was no trains in Northern Ireland. Being a train driver, when they murdered him, all the odd train drivers quit working for a number of days. This man here, every Remembrance Sunday week before the parade in Portadown, we go down to Seagull. He's buried down in Seagull. And we go down to lay wreaths on the graves of all the ones who were killed in the regiment. Sergeant Alfred Doyle. Sergeant Doyle was returning from a dog show in Cork, along with two other men in the car. Gerald Thompson, whose wife just lives across from me in Tandregee now, in Willowfield Heights in Tandregee, and a man called Preshaw, I think he called the other man. As the couple were driving, just crossed over the border, they seen what looked like a checkpoint, but it wasn't a security forces checkpoint. So they drove up. The IRA opened fire on them when they stopped the car. I was reading the report that says the police believe that each man was shot over 20 times. So they were standing with automatic weapons and at least 3 gunmen, and they emptied the full magazine into each of the 3 men in the car. You know, at the time, Sergeant Doyle was the youngest sergeant in the British Army. He's buried there in Seagull in Portadown. This man here, Robert Harrison, he was a colour sergeant in D Company, that's Guildford Banbridge UDR, but he didn't drive. And he says it was getting too hard getting in and out of the station, or in and out of the UDR barracks. So he transferred. He said, if I joined the police, I could work here in Guildford Barracks. So he left UDR and joined the RUC Reserve. They were in Guildford Police Station, and a phone call come through that there'd been a break-in in a shop in the centre of Guildford. Guildford's only a wee small village, only a part-time police station. So the 2 policemen in the station come out, get into their car, and drove up to get to the shop. As they got out of the car, from the other side of the road, the IRA were lying in ambush. They opened up and cut the 2 of them down. Constable Harrison was killed, and the other policeman was a Portadown man, James Davison. He survived, but so heavy was the gunfire that it cut his arm off. In a wee village like Guildford. There's actually a memorial to him also in Guildford Orange Hall, as well as in the church. And at the moment we're trying to, I'm working on a project to get names put onto the Banbridge Memorial, War Memorial, and we're also trying to update the Guildford War Memorial. And hopefully at that time they won't put the likes of this man on, because the police is looked on as a civilian force, so they won't put their name on the memorial. But hopefully when we do that next year, that we'll be able to get a separate plaque put on for this man to give his life in the village of Guildford. This man here, when I joined the Ulster Defence Regiment, Captain John Truckle was the man who gave me my reference to join. The anniversary of his murder was yesterday. He was a Second World War veteran and had come over here during the Second World War. Just after the Second World War, he came over here with the army and met a local woman and married her instead. He served in the Ulster Special Constabulary, and then he joined the Ulster Defence Regiment whenever it was formed. And then he had retired from the UDR at the time of his murder. He was blown up in Woodside and Portadown. In that time, the time that he was killed, Harold McCusker, the Unionist MP, and he was right in what he said. there was a campaign to turn the Gavahi Road into a nationalist ghetto. And how they were going to do that was they were going to drive everyone who wasn't a nationalist out or murder them. And it worked. And then once they got it cleansed of the ones that they don't want, we all know what happened when things like Drumcree and stuff like that. They were manipulating the population to make things happen. But Johnny, I've seen Brian Walker actually had a bit on the internet yesterday about him. And as I said, he was such a nice man and such a respected officer that whenever he walked in the room, the colonel stood up. Really, really brilliant man. And what Johnny, he worked in Wades in Portadown. And every regiment that come to Northern Ireland and was based in Portadown, Johnny got them commemorative tankers made in the pottery where he worked. These are two that I have, two 11 UDR tankers. And here you can see Johnny showing a regiment round, and their tankards are being manufactured for them. And the thing I like about the picture is, my mother died just over 2 years ago. That's my mother making the tankers. As they were showing Johnny around. You know, sometimes you'll see them coming up, different regiments and all, but Johnny was the man behind all that there. It was blown to pieces in Woodside and Portadown. A really, really good friend of mine, David Montgomery, used to call David the wee sergeant major because he used to lead a flute band and they wore the little peak caps and David has pulled down like a sergeant major when he was leading the band. He lived on Soldiers Town Road, Achillee. David, he worked in the airport filling stations, airport road filling station, or just when you go under the railway bridge. They tell you they'll change your route, do all this. Well, he had to go there, that's where he worked. The day he was shot, he just got a new car, so they weren't following his car. And what happened, David was a Christian, and he told his minister, I feel compelled that I have to serve to protect my country, but I don't think I could ever kill anyone. The IRA gunmen pulled in to the forecourt of the petrol station where he worked. There was people all in the shop. It's a very busy filling station. It's all one of the main arteries in Northern Ireland. They walked in, told everyone to lie down, and then there must have been a local person, because there was another person in a mask who walked up. That's him there. Pointed him out. And David had a gun on him. But he didn't take his gun out, because he said he was a Christian and he couldn't shoot anyone. They walked up and shot him twice in the face. He was 21 years old. You know, a brave man and true to his commitments and his beliefs. On the night David was killed, remember that petrol station, if you're ever mopping a dirty floor and there's too much water and you're swilling and there's dirt all, they were mopping the floor and they were swilling David's blood. The fellow you know, his blood diluted down with the water as they were moving the mop around the floor trying to clean the area up. They sent me over to C Company that night. Everything was all go, and the company in C Company was obviously short of someone. David was killed. This man, David Chambers, he was there. He was an old one in the same platoon as David, two Davids. David Chambers, only a few months after David Montgomery, was driving out of Lurgan to Donalstown to the Boxmore factory. And as he was driving out the road, an IRA gunman came walking out as he was turning to go into the factory and opened up with a shotgun shooting him twice in the chest, knocking him off the motorcycle he was on. They then ran over and shot him as he lay on the ground. But they weren't finished yet. They're totally callous. They then put a booby-trap bomb on his body to blow up the policemen who would be coming to the scene. The actually strange thing is, unusual, they never caught anyone for Johnny Truckle, they never caught anyone for David McGowan. They caught one of the boys who shot David Chambers. A year after he was in jail, it was in the paper, the man who was sent to jail for his murder. Sometimes it amazes me with legal aid. If somebody was a victim, they can get money for nothing, or they can't get money off them. This man, a convicted murderer in jail, got legal aid to take the British government to court saying that he was a young man just murdered or just married, and that by putting him in jail, they were denying his wife's civil right to have children. Seriously. And by the time that he gets released from jail, his wife will all be too old to have children. You couldn't make the stories up. David Chambers' wife actually gave evidence against him getting this conjugal rights in jail, which he lost the case based on what she had to give. And she said she had a 3-year-old child and a baby in the pram. Says that other wife knows that her husband will be coming home someday. Says, because of him, my husband and them children's father will never be coming home. This is happening here in our country. If you told young people this now, they wouldn't believe it. What was going on. These are just, any of you ever go to the National Arboretum in Staffordshire, and you're walking around and you'll see these here in some of the trees. Victor Smith was the first member of the Ulster Defence Regiment to be killed by a bomb, although they never claimed responsibility. He was coming from Camp Seago in Portadown. Normally he drove up the North Way to go to Edgarstown where he lived, but a fella asked him would he give him a lift into Craigavon. So he gave the man a lift into Craigavon, dropped him off, and then proceeded to drive on up to town, where it's now Shavarg, we used to call it, the classic bar it was called then. They'd left a bomb outside the bar. As he was driving past, the bomb exploded. His car took the full force of the blast. The car toppled over, went on fire, and he burnt to death in the car. At the bottom of Portadown Street, where those barriers were, that's the reality of Northern Ireland, the country we lived in. And people, the government don't want to even talk about that now. Here's another man, Robert Joseph McNally. He would die as part of the IRA's campaign to get Protestants out of the Gavahi Road. He lived in Woodside. He was a full-time member of the Ulster Defence Regiment. He parked his car in McGann Buildings in Portadown. When he returned to the car, an under-car booby trap went off, blew off his 2 legs, but he didn't die. They got him to hospital, and he hanged in, but eventually succumbed to his wounds. He was blown nearly in 2, but he survived the initial blast. Another man from Woodside, part of that ethnic cleansing to drive those people from that area. The last man to die in 11 UDR, William Richard McGrath. He's the only Catholic member of 11 UDR today. He worked in the Ford factory in Belfast. He lived on the outskirts of Lisburn, and as he was driving home from the Ford factory, he had to drive through some Republican areas in Belfast. And when he got to a set of traffic lights, they were waiting, and walked out and opened up and riddled them with bullets. But there you have in 1987, so I'm not trying, it's a terrible amount, but there still was some very brave Roman Catholics serving in the regiment, and that man was one of them. Some more remember, no, this isn't a complete 11 UDR. The number of men killed in County Armagh is ridiculous. Erwin Long, an officer from Lurgan, he was shot while going to pick his children up from their grandparents' house. Ivan Vennard, he's on a memorial plaque down here in the Garden of Remembrance. Ivan was a postman. He was shot in Lurgan. William Freeburn, shot in the Glasgow Celtic Supporters Club in Lurgan. What he was in there for a drink, I don't know, but it shows you how it worked. When they seen him in that Catholic bar, someone knew where to go and quickly get a gunman to get him to come back. We have a fella in here. And they come back and murdered him in there. George Lutton, he was shot at the Edward Street barrier in Lurgan. They said when they're all foot patrol shot by a sniper when they're manning the barriers at the time. Peter Topping, he's another Lurgan man. He'd been in the Royal Irish Rangers in the Army Reserves. He left them and joined the UDR. And he left the UDR to join the RUC. He was killed along with 8 other RUC officers when the IRM water-bombed Newry police station. I think some of you remember that happening, but that man there, he'd been in the UDR just before that there, before he joined the police. Colin McCullough, he was shot in the car sitting with his girlfriend. She was sitting beside him when they murdered her. They then taunted his girlfriend in her work and when she went about town about his murder. Norman Kendall. Norman had left the UDR, but he was murdered along with 3 other men. 2 of them I knew. I didn't know Norman, but I knew Tom Taylor, who was a police reservist and an Orange man. I was over in Brownlow House in his lodge room and have a banneret with his painting on it in the lodge room. David Murphy, who was superintendent in the RUC, he was along with Norman Kendall at the time, and another fellow I knew was Keith Dow. Keith had never served in anything, but all 4 of them were shot at Casters Bay in Lurgan when they were going out duck shooting one morning. They were waiting for them. You know, very, very savage right here. And then John Linus, who was shot in Lurgan, heading back to his home. And I said, this sounds, but this is not the complete 11. I couldn't do you 2 UDR Roll of Honour. 2 UDR was so many men lost, and women. But there wasn't just, if you go to the National Arboretum, there wasn't just men losing their lives in UDR. Corporal David Brown, Queen's Gallantry Medal. And this is for the Army search dogs. Army Dog Unit, Northern Ireland. The dogs would use to look for bombs and look for explosives. And you see it, ammunition explosive search dog, Oliver and Ben, killed in action in Northern Ireland. I love dogs, I'm a real dog man. And although so I was interested in this memorial, and the thing which fascinated me when I went to that memorial was 30 years after that dog had been killed, they'd come to lay a wreath for the man who was the dog handler, and they'd also laid a wreath for the dog. to give his life for the people of Northern Ireland. But Corporal Brown and his dog, this is them. They were flying around Northern Ireland searching for bombs, searching for explosives to make the country a safer and better place. While they were out on patrol, the dog triggered a booby trap, killing the dog and killing Corporal Brown. He is awarded the Queen's Gallantry Medal for his actions. And in 2008, the Orange Lodge, which he'd been a member of, SPA LOL 620, won the Orange Awards for the best new banner that year, which was a banner of Corporal Brown and his dog, who were killed in action. A few years ago, in 1997, I'm the chairman of the Portadown branch of the Regimental Association, and back then we were having a dinner. It was, I'll not say the man's name, but the man, he's in the picture, he pointed out, this coming Friday is 25 years to the day that we went on our last patrol. He says we went on patrol as the Ulster Defence Regiment and returned as the Royal Irish Regiment. So we had a special dinner to mark 25 years of the last day of the regiment on the 25th anniversary. And this wee man, you have to watch us wee fellas. The smallest boy in the picture, but he's a complete hero. Corporal Eric Glass, Distinguished Conduct Medal, Queen's Gallantry Medal, Ulster Defence Medal. The most decorated soldier in Operation Banner, and the most decorated soldier in the Ulster Defence Regiment. I don't know if any of us have ever heard him speaking. I've been lucky enough to hear him a couple of times. He come that night to speak at our dinner, and I've seen him then one night in Bridge at the Orange Hall, and he tells the story about every time the IRA tried to murder him on a number of occasions, and every time he fought back, killing terrorists in the engagement, even though always being severely wounded himself. And when you talk to him, he's kind of going along, you'd expect the most decorated to be some big butch. He's the quietest wee man you ever met. But he was the most decorated soldier in the troubles here in Northern Ireland. He's getting on now in years like all of them. But we're here in the Museum of Orange Heritage. And not only is he a Distinguished Conduct Medal, a Queen's Gallantry Medal, he's a 50-year medal holder in the Orange Order as well. So he must be the most highly decorated orange man in the country as well. In the years after the regiment was done away with the amalgamation, you've seen more and more monuments going up around the country. You've all probably seen the Lisburn Memorial, which is a memorial to all those who served in the regiment. At the National Arboretum, they have this monument which stands in what's called the Ulster Ashgrove, where they also have the RUC memorial. The memorial to all the soldiers killed in Northern Ireland is also in that. The Army Dog Unit memorial is there, and the B Specials memorial is there. That footpath going up the back is where all the RUC stations are all marked out, and will tell you the officers know who were killed and all of them. There's a little obelisk we have in Portadown. You'll see the same in Lurgan. There's a bigger one in Bridge. There's a lot of these here going up around the country as well. But I don't know if anybody's ever seen this. This is in St Mark's Church in Portadown. And the Portadown Association put this window up in St Mark's in 2011. And actually had people around, and lots of people have seen it, but they don't know the full meaning of the window. I'll just point it out. If you look at that stained glass window, it starts with a crown, God the King, over everything. I hurt myself here. So there's God over everything. Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the end. What do they call County Armagh, especially around here in Lochall, the Orchard County? So Portadown had the 11th Battalion in the Orchard County. There is 11 apples, 5 on one side and 6 on the other, for the 11th Battalion in the Orchard County. If you look at it, this is the cross of the Church of Ireland because it's in the Church of Ireland Church. The regimental badge of the Ulster Defence Regiment, the conspicuous gallantry cross that was awarded to the regiment. The one thing they told us when you're putting it up, you're not allowed to put a stained glass window in with someone with a gun. You're not allowed guns. But you are allowed a sword. So they have the centurion standing guard, standing firm. He's standing guard, protecting on one side. And here we have David against Goliath. It says, the odds look against David, but it's the triumph of good over evil. He's still prepared to face the enemy. Here, you've seen that little obelisk that Portadown War Memorial. You have a member of the Ulster Defence Regiment and a member of Water standing at the Portadown obelisk beside the War Memorial. Here, you have a drumhead service like the military would hold on the battlefield. So they have the drums piled up and the regimental standards laid out over the top of them. And here we have a piper playing a lament as he walks away from the grave of the fallen. So if you're ever in St. Mark's, look that out. It's on the right-hand side as you walk in. On the other side, on the left-hand side facing it, they've actually an RUC stained glass window. So if you, the sad fact is most of the time the churches are locked up and you can't get in to see these things. As I said, the piper's walking away playing a lament. You get lots of people coming out with mistakes. They keep saying the UDR and they go, Fá Abala. Fá Abala is the Royal Irish Regiment and the Royal Irish Fusiliers. UDR are not Fá Abala as a motto. It's Quis Separatat, the same as the Royal Ulster Rifles, the same as the Royal Irish Rifles, and the same as Northern Ireland. That is the motto of the country of Northern Ireland, if you look at the National Coat of Arms. And equally, Killaloo is not the regimental march of the UDR. Lots of people seem to think it is. It's actually Gary Owen, which is a far better tune. I was watching a film just the other day and showing you the US 7th Cavalry. They go with Gary Owen as well. So Custer was UDR man. We started off, and the guy says, at the very start, that little film, he says, why don't you go catch some terrorists? Well, this is particulars of proceedings requiring attendance of a military witness. That's me. I caught one. Following on from the challenge, why didn't you catch some terrorists? I'll not say the guy's name, but sir, he was found guilty, so we've nothing to worry about. His sister was found guilty of ringing up Johnny Truckle's wife after he'd been murdered and asking could Johnny come to the phone. And when his wife all went quiet, she would then say, oh, but sure, Johnny can't come to the phone. He's in bits and pieces all over your garden. That man's sister, she tried to beat me with stuff the night I was arresting him. But lucky enough, I was wearing body armour, so if she was beating away, it wasn't doing me any harm. And the old guy is an old man from Tandagee, but he sadly passed away about 20 years ago. And that was part of the campaign to move Protestants out of that area. So the challenge was, why didn't you go catch some terrorists? They caught one. And it was very good. I'm going to finish and wrap it all up now, but last year I attended the unveiling of this memorial. I'm sure lots of you know where it is. It's St Mark's in Armagh. And they're coming out in this country now with all this nonsense. They're telling you, you should thank this man, a terrorist. You should thank a politician. You should thank all these people for creating peace here in Northern Ireland. And they're talking a load of nonsense. The reason we have the semblance of peace that we have here in County Armagh is for the policemen, the soldiers and the prison officers who are on this wall, who laid down their lives to pay for that peace. It was no politician, it was no terrorist who gave you peace. It was these men and women who paid for it in their blood. And with that, I hope you enjoyed that, and I'll just say thank you very much.
Are there any questions to Richard before we bring proceedings to conclusion, folks?
One wee thing we'll just put this before we go. This year is the 75th anniversary of the end of the Second World War. And there's lots of things all planned to mark it. But a fellow, Clive Higginson, I volunteered in the museum in Brindle House. Clive and I put this little book together, if any is interested, they're £5 a copy. It's called Lurgan Heroes. And it's all the ones from Lurgan who were killed in the Second World War. When I actually went to the printer, I had to tell them, says, I don't think those two words go together, Lurgan and hero, but there's quite a few heroes and quite a few heroic stories, and if any of us are interested in a copy. Thank you.
Can I just say to you, Richard, a very big thank you for your talk to us this evening. Once again, a very informative talk, and you brought home to us and reminded us of so many gallant men and women who paid the supreme sacrifice in the defence of our country. We have, as you rightly pointed out, 68 names of our own county written down below, but you brought it back home to us again this evening. And the challenge again is that we never forget,
Yes.
and we continue to perpetuate the memory of all those people for what they've done for us in the past. And sometimes as we go along every day, we wonder why we're in the mess we're in today, why we paid, and many of us served either in the Ulster Defence Regiment or in the RUC. And you do have to question at times why other people get away with what they've done. But everything of that is in the hands of the man above, and like each one of us, we'll all have to face our Maker someday in the future and answer for all our actions. So a very big thank you to you, Richard, for this evening, and I would ask everybody to show their appreciation. Now, before we go home this evening, I was going to do this at the start of the meeting, and I was afraid of putting you off doing your talk. But there's a very small select group of people. There's the Friends of Sloane's House. But then we have another very special group of people. There's one of them sitting down here this evening, Hilda Winter. We lost one honorary member recently, and it was the decision of the directors and the management committee of Sloane's House that we would like to make you an honorary member of the Friends of Sloane's House, and it gives me great pleasure and privilege to present you with your certificate confirming that. And a very big thank you,
Thank you
Richard,
very much.
for all that you've done, and also with a County Armagh tie.
Thank you.
Don't count the number of strings and
No,
just in case. No problem. That was designed by
Thank
the
you.
late Victor Stewart,
No.
and also in that is also your membership certificate, your membership badge, your postcard, and your diary for next year,
Thank you
which
very
is to
much.
commemorate. And again,
Very honoured. Oh, I can't shake anymore.
congratulations and well done.
I'm very,
We're
very
delighted to
honoured
have
by
you.
that there, really, really am.
So
Because
thank
it's
you.
a total pleasure to have a chance to even come along and speak to you here tonight, especially in the trying times we find ourselves. And I do hope you found it a bit interesting what I was going on about, you know. And with that, just no, thank you, everyone. Thanks for
Jim,
coming along.
would you maybe just close in prayer? Bring our proceedings to
Right,
that. Thank you.
okay, let's just bow in prayer. Heavenly Father, as we have listened to Richard here tonight, and as we've been through the different things there, we thank you for those who give their lives that we might have peace. Father, we pray for their families, and we ask, Lord, that you would surround them with your love at this time. Father, again, we just thank you for your presence with us. We pray, Lord, that you be with each one of us as we journey home, and we pray that you would keep us in your care and keeping in the days that lie ahead. In Jesus' name, amen.
Good night, everyone, and safe home.
Hopefully I was very free.
Lovely, great.